Commander Jiwan Park sat in his small office aboard the TDF Incheon, staring at files that nobody else wanted to read. The papers were old, some of them over 200 years old. They told stories about human colonies that had been built far, away from Earth, in places where few people dared to go. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Jiwan rubbed his tired eyes and picked up another file. This one was about Kepler 442b, a planet that humans had tried to make into a home long ago. The file was marked with big red letters that said, "Contact lost, presumed destroyed." Jiwan had read these words so many times that he knew them by heart. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the way Dr. So-Young Kim had looked at him during the morning briefing, or maybe it was the strange reports that had been coming in from the edge of space. He opened his computer and called up the star maps. The colonies had been humanity's first real attempt to spread across the galaxy. Back then, Earth's leaders thought they could build new homes on distant worlds and create a better future for everyone. They sent ships full of farmers, scientists, engineers, and their families to planets that were light years away from home. For a while, it worked. The colonies sent back reports about their progress. They talked about building cities, growing food, and making new discoveries. Children were born on these new worlds, children who would never see Earth with their own eyes. But then the Vegan War started. Jiwan had studied the war in military school. It was a brutal conflict that lasted 15 years and nearly destroyed human civilization. Alien raiders swept through space like a disease, attacking any human settlement they could find. Earth's military was stretched too thin, trying to protect too many places at once. The Outer Rim colonies were the first to go silent. At first, Earth's leaders thought it was just communication problems. Space was vast, and signals could be blocked by solar storms or enemy jamming. But weeks turned into months and months turned into years. No signals came from the colonies. No ships returned home. It was as if the settlements had simply vanished from existence. Search and rescue missions were planned, but they never happened. Earth was fighting for its own survival, and there were no ships to spare for what everyone assumed were already dead worlds. The colonies were written off as casualties of war, their names added to long lists of the lost and forgotten. That was 200 years ago. Jiwan closed the file and walked to the small window in his office. Outside, stars filled the darkness of space like tiny diamonds scattered on black cloth. Somewhere out there, beyond what humans could see, were the worlds where his people had tried to build new homes. A soft beep from his computer made him turn around. He had a new message waiting for him. It was from Dr. So-Young Kim, the fleet's expert on alien archaeology and ancient technology. She was one of the smartest people Jiwan had ever met, and she rarely contacted him unless she had discovered something important. The message was short and to the point. "Commander, I need to see you in Lab 7 immediately. I found something you need to see. Come alone." Jiwan grabbed his uniform jacket and left his office. The corridors of the TDF Incheon were busy even at this late hour. Crew members hurried past him, carrying out the endless tasks that kept a military ship running. Most of them were young, born long after the Vegan War ended. They knew the stories about the lost colonies, but to them it was ancient history. Lab 7 was located in the deepest part of the ship, away from the noise and activity of the main decks. Jiwan had to use his command codes to get through 2 security doors before he reached the laboratory. Dr. Kim was waiting for him inside. She was a small woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and graying hair that she kept pulled back in a simple ponytail. Her lab coat was wrinkled and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Thank you for coming so quickly," she said, gesturing for him to follow her to a bank of computers and monitoring equipment. "I wasn't sure who else I could trust with this." "What did you find?" Jiwan asked. So-Young pulled up a display on one of the larger screens. It showed waves of different colors moving across a black background, like an ocean made of light and sound. "These are deep space transmissions," she explained. "Background radiation that travels between star systems. Most of it is natural, energy from dying stars, cosmic storms, that sort of thing. But buried in all that noise, I've been finding something else." She pointed to a section of the display where the waves formed a regular pattern. To Jiwan, it looked like random static, But So-young's excitement was clear. These are structured signals, she continued. They're not natural phenomena. Someone is broadcasting them using very specific frequencies and timing patterns. Ji-won studied the screen more carefully. Who's sending them? That's what I've been trying to figure out, So-young said. She pulled up another display, this one showing a star map with several points marked in red. The signals are coming from 3 different locations. All of them are in the outer rim, in sectors that were abandoned after the Vegan War. A cold feeling settled in Ji-won's stomach. The dead colonies? That's what I thought at first, So-young nodded. But these aren't distress calls or random transmissions. Look at this. She played an audio recording that filled the lab with strange, crackling sounds. To most people, it would sound like meaningless noise. But Ji-won had spent years in military communications, and he could hear the patterns hidden in the static. That's Morse code, he said quietly. Modified Morse code using old Earth military protocols, So-young confirmed. Whoever is sending these signals knows our communication systems from 2 centuries ago. They're using encryption methods that were classified during the Vegan War. Ji-won felt his heart beating faster. Have you decoded the messages? So-young hesitated for a moment, then pulled up a text file on her screen. The words made Ji-won's blood run cold. Terra Actual, this is Kepler Outpost. Perimeter secure. Enemy movement detected in Sector 7. Request immediate reinforcement. Will hold position until relieved. Message ends. The lab fell silent except for the hum of the computers. Ji-won read the message 3 more times, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. When was this sent? He asked. 2 days ago, So-young replied. And it's not the only one. I've recorded dozens of similar transmissions over the past month. They're all military in nature. Status reports, tactical updates, requests for supplies and reinforcements. But that's impossible, Ji-won said. The colonies have been dead for 200 years. Have they? So-young asked. Or did we just assume they were dead because we stopped hearing from them? Ji-won walked to the other side of the lab, his mind racing. The implications were enormous. If the colonies had somehow survived, if there were still humans living on those distant worlds, it changed everything. Earth had written off millions of its own people, left them to face whatever dangers lurked in the outer rim alone. We need to inform Admiral Kyung-lee immediately, he said. I already tried, So-young replied, her voice heavy with frustration. He took my report to the Galactic Council 3 days ago. The Galactic Council was the governing body that made decisions for all the intelligent species in the local arm of the galaxy. Humans were members, but they were considered a junior species, with limited influence compared to older civilizations like the reptilian Dreknari or the crystalline Nixari. What did they say? So-young pulled up another file on her computer. It was an official response from the council, written in the formal language that bureaucrats love to use. High Counselor Thexmai dismissed the evidence as inconclusive and potentially fabricated, she read aloud. The Council's official position is that resources should not be wasted investigating phantom signals from dead worlds. They suggested that the transmissions might be coming from automated systems that are still running after all these years. Ji-won felt anger building in his chest. Automated systems don't send tactical reports about enemy movements. I pointed that out, So-young said. The Council wasn't interested in hearing it. They said that humanity has a tendency to chase ghosts and false hopes, instead of focusing on practical matters. The dismissal was typical of how the Council treated human concerns. To them, humanity was a young species that didn't understand how the galaxy really worked. They saw humans as emotional and impulsive, always looking for dramatic solutions to simple problems. But Ji-won knew better. He had spent his entire career in space, and he understood that the galaxy was full of dangers that the Council preferred to ignore. While alien politicians made speeches about peace and cooperation, human military forces were usually the ones who ended up fighting the battles that kept everyone safe. Has Admiral Lee seen this latest data? He asked. He's reviewing it now, So-young replied. But I don't think he's going to get permission for an official investigation. The Council has made their position clear. Jiwan stared at the star map showing the locations where the signals were coming from. Kepler 442b, Proxima Centauri b, and Wolf 3559c, 3 worlds where humans had once tried to build new homes. If people were still alive there, they had been waiting 200 years for Earth to remember them. What if we didn't wait for permission? He asked quietly. So-young looked at him with surprise. What do you mean? I mean, what if we went to investigate on our own? Small. The journey to Kepler 442b took 3 weeks of hyperspace travel. Captain Minho Choi spent most of that time running combat simulations and checking equipment. He was the kind of officer who believed in being prepared for anything, even when he had no idea what to expect. The small reconnaissance fleet consisted of 3 ships, the TDF Seoul, the TDF Busan, and the TDF Daegu. Each ship carried a crew of 40 people, including scientists, engineers, and marines. It was a tiny force compared to the massive fleets that usually traveled between star systems, but Admiral Kyung Lee had chosen quality over quantity. When they finally dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler system, the first thing Minho noticed was how quiet everything seemed. Space around inhabited worlds was usually full of radio signals, ship traffic, and the electromagnetic noise that came from advanced civilization. Here there was almost nothing. Sensors are picking up some unusual readings from the planet, reported Lieutenant Hanul Shin from the navigation station. But they're not like anything in our databases. Minho studied the display screen that showed Kepler 442b floating in the darkness ahead of them. The planet looked normal enough. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling through the atmosphere. But something about it felt wrong, like a picture that was slightly out of focus. What kind of readings? He asked. Energy signatures that don't match standard colonial technology, Hanul replied. And there are structures on the surface that are much larger than anything the original colonists could have built. Dr. So-young Kim looked up from her console, where she had been analyzing the mysterious signals that had brought them here. The transmissions are definitely coming from the planet, she confirmed. But they're using directional broadcasting now. Someone down there knows we're here. Before anyone could respond, the ship's communication system crackled to life. A voice filled the bridge, speaking clear English with an accent that sounded almost, but not quite, like the way people talked on Earth. Unknown vessels. This is Kepler Ground Control. Identify yourselves and state your business in this system. The crew of the Soul looked at each other in shock. After 200 years of silence, they had expected to find either empty ruins or no trace of human presence at all. They hadn't expected to be challenged by what sounded like an active military command. Minho took a deep breath and activated the ship's communication array. Kepler Ground Control, this is Captain Minho Choi of the Terran Defense Fleet vessel Seoul. We are on a reconnaissance mission authorized by Earth Command. There was a long pause before the voice responded. Earth Command? Captain, please transmit your authorization codes and stand by for security verification. The request surprised Minho. The original colonies had been civilian settlements with minimal military presence. Where had they learned about military protocols and security procedures? Sir, whispered Communications Officer Jamin. Oh, the codes. They're asking for R from the old Earth Defense Network. Those systems were decommissioned over a century ago. Minho thought quickly. If the colonists had somehow maintained their military communication systems, they might still recognize the ancient authorization codes that Earth had used during the Vegan War. Transmit the old codes, he ordered. All of them. Jamin's fingers flew over his console, sending streams of data that hadn't been used since Minho's grandfather was a young man. The response came back almost immediately. Codes verified. Captain Choi, you are cleared for orbital approach to landing platform 7. Be advised that this system is currently under military jurisdiction. Any deviation from approved flight paths will result in immediate engagement. The casual mention of military jurisdiction and threat of engagement made everyone on the bridge nervous. These didn't sound like the words of grateful colonists who had been waiting centuries for rescue. They sounded like the words of people who were used to fighting wars. As the Soul moved closer to the planet, more details became visible on the sensors. The structures that Hanul had detected were indeed much larger than anything the original colonists could have built. Cities covered entire continents, connected by transport networks that spanned thousands of kilometers. And everywhere there were signs of heavy industrial activity. "Captain," said Engineer Yunji Nam from her station, "I'm detecting massive energy production facilities on the surface. The power output is 10 times what a normal colony would need." "What are they using all that power for?" Minho asked. His answer came when the ship's tactical officer, Lieutenant Somin Jung, looked up from her console with wide eyes. "Sir, I'm reading weapons platforms all across the planet's surface. Railguns, plasma cannons, missile batteries. Enough firepower to take on a full battle fleet. The implications hit everyone at the same time. The lost colony of Kepler 442b hadn't just survived. It had turned itself into a fortress world. The landing platform they were directed to was a massive structure built into the side of a mountain. As the Sol descended through the planet's atmosphere, Minho could see that the entire mountain had been hollowed out and converted into what looked like a military base. Hangars large enough to hold battleships were carved into the rock, and defensive turrets tracked their movement with mechanical precision. "This isn't a colony anymore," Dr. Kim observed quietly. "This is a military installation." The landing was smooth, guided by automated systems that brought the ship down onto a metal platform that could have easily accommodated vessels 10 times their size. As the engines wound down and the crew prepared to disembark, Minho tried to prepare himself for what they might find outside. The airlock opened to reveal a delegation of people waiting for them on the landing platform. They were definitely human, but there was something different about them. They moved with the kind of precision that came from military training, and their clothing looked like uniforms rather than civilian clothes. The man leading the group stepped forward as Minho and his senior officers emerged from the ship. He was tall and lean, with graying hair and scars on his face that spoke of hard experience. When he spoke, his voice was the same one they had heard over the radio. "Captain Choi, I'm Commander Taehyun Ko, military governor of Kepler 442b. Welcome to Fort Sejong." The name caught Minho off guard. Fort Sejong had been one of Earth's most important military bases during the Vegan War, but it had been destroyed when alien raiders attacked the Sol system. How had a colony on the edge of space come to use the same name? "Commander Ko," Minho replied, extending his hand in greeting. "We're honored to meet you. Earth has wondered about the fate of the Outer Rim colonies for 2 centuries. Taehyun's handshake was firm and brief. "We know," he said. "We've been monitoring your communications for decades. We know that Earth wrote us off as dead after contact was lost." There was no anger in his voice, just a statement of fact. But Minho could hear something else underneath the words. A hardness that came from people who had been forced to rely only on themselves. "We never stopped hoping," Minho said. "That's why we're here now." "Hope is a luxury we gave up long ago," Taehyun replied. "Follow me. There's much you need to see and little time to see it." As they walked through the base, Minho was amazed by what the colonists had built. The corridors were wide enough for heavy equipment, and every surface was covered with displays showing tactical information, resource allocation, and what looked like deployment schedules for military units. "How many people live here?" Dr. Kim asked as they passed a section where hundreds of workers were assembling what looked like spacecraft components. "On Kepler? About 50 million, Taehyun replied casually. "Across all the surviving colonies, maybe 200 million total." The number was staggering. The original colonial missions had carried only a few thousand people each. How had their population grown so dramatically? "Surviving colonies?" Lieutenant Hanul asked.
"How many colonies are still active?" 15, Taehyun answered. "Out of the original 47 that were established before the war. The others..." He paused for a moment. "The others served their purpose. They entered what appeared to be
a command center, with holographic displays showing star maps and tactical information. The room was busy with people working at various stations, all of them focused on tasks that looked urgent and important. "This is our operations center," Taehyun explained. "From here, we coordinate defense activities across 3 star systems and monitor threat levels throughout the Outer Rim." "Defense against what?" Minho asked. Taehyun looked at him with an expression that might have been pity. You really don't know, do you? Earth has been isolated in its little bubble of civilization for so long that you've forgotten what's out there in the dark. He activated one of the holographic displays, showing a three-dimensional map of local space. Red markers indicated hostile contacts, and there were far more of them than Minho had expected. These are enemy formations that we've detected in the past month, Taehyun said. Raiders, slavers, and worse things that hunt in the spaces between stars. While your Galactic Council has been making speeches about peace and cooperation, we've been fighting a war that most of the galaxy doesn't even know exists. Engineer Yoonji stared at the display with fascination and horror. How long has this been going on? Since about 50 years after we lost contact with Earth. The return journey to Earth felt like traveling through a dream that was slowly becoming a nightmare. Captain Minho Choi spent most of his time reviewing the data they had collected on Kepler 442b, trying to make sense of what they had discovered. The colonies weren't just alive. They had become something that nobody could have predicted. Strategic analyst Ji Yeon-yu worked around the clock, piecing together timeline information from the colonial records that Commander Taehyun Ko had shared with them. According to their historical files, she reported to the senior officers during one of their daily briefings. The first contact with what they call devourers happened 53 years after they lost communication with Earth. A deep space mining operation detected unusual energy signatures near the edge of their system. Lieutenant Hanul looked up from his navigation charts. What kind of energy signatures? Something that their scientists couldn't identify, Jiyeon replied. The mining ship went to investigate and never returned. 3 days later, automated. Sensors detected the ship approaching the colony at high speed, but when they tried to communicate with it, there was no response. Dr. So-young Kim felt a chill run down her spine. What happened to the crew? They were still aboard the ship, Jiyeon said quietly, but they had been changed. The colonial records described them as partially converted organic components integrated into a larger mechanical system. They were alive, but they were no longer entirely human. The briefing room fell silent as everyone tried to process what they were hearing. The idea of people being turned into parts of alien machines was the kind of horror story that appeared in cheap entertainment programs, not in real military reports. The colonists managed to destroy the converted ship before it reached their main settlement, Jiyeon continued. But the attack convinced them that they were facing something completely unlike any known alien species. Engineer Yoonji Nam had been studying the technical specifications of colonial equipment that Taehyun had allowed them to examine. Their technology development after that first contact is remarkable, she said. They went from standard civilian manufacturing to advanced military production in less than 10 years. How did they manage that? Minho asked. Necessity, Yoonji replied. And salvage. Every time they destroyed a devourer probe or scout ship, they recovered pieces of alien technology. Their engineers learned to reverse engineer these components and integrate them into human designs. She activated a holographic display showing technical diagrams of colonial weapons and spacecraft. The designs were unlike anything in Earth's military database. A fusion of human engineering principles with technology that was clearly alien in origin. Look at this plasma rifle, she said, highlighting one of the weapon designs. It uses a miniaturized fusion reactor based on devourer power systems, but the targeting and control mechanisms are purely human. The result is a weapon that's 3 times more powerful than anything in our arsenal, but still simple enough for field maintenance. Weapons specialist Dongwook Bae studied the diagrams with professional interest. What about their larger systems? Ship weapons, defensive installations? Even more impressive, Yoonji replied. Their capital ships can operate in complete stealth mode for months at a time, using power management techniques they learned from captured devourer technology. And their orbital defense platforms can generate plasma fields strong enough to destroy incoming asteroids. The technical capabilities of the colonies were staggering, but what impressed Minho most was the speed with which they had developed these advances. Earth's military research programs took decades to develop new technologies, Yet the colonies had revolutionized their entire technological base in a generation. They didn't have a choice, Dr. Kim observed. When your survival depends on staying ahead of an enemy that can turn your own people against you, innovation becomes a matter of life and death. Jian pulled up another section of the colonial records, showing population statistics and military organization charts. The social changes are just as dramatic as the technological ones, she said. Within 20 years of first contact, every colonial settlement had implemented universal military service. Everyone serves in the military? Hanul asked. Everyone, Jian confirmed. From age 16 to 65, every citizen spends at least 4 hours a day in military training or support activities. Children start learning basic tactics and weapon maintenance as soon as they can walk. The idea of an entire civilization organized around warfare was disturbing, but Minho was beginning to understand why the colonies had found it necessary. They weren't just fighting occasional raids or border skirmishes. They were engaged in a constant struggle for survival against an enemy that never stopped trying to destroy them. What about their fleet? He asked. Jian brought up ship registry, data that made everyone in the room take notice. As of last year, the 15 surviving colonies operate a combined fleet of over 8,000 vessels. Most are small patrol ships and fighters, but they also have approximately 200 capital ships that are larger and more heavily armed than anything Earth has ever built. The numbers were hard to believe. Earth's entire Terran defense fleet consisted of fewer than 300 ships, and most of those were designed for exploration and peacekeeping rather than serious combat. How did they build so many ships? Dongwook asked. Industrial automation on a scale we've never attempted, Yunji replied. Every colony has massive manufacturing facilities that can produce spacecraft components 24 hours a day. They've turned entire moons into factory complexes. And they've had 2 centuries to build up their forces, Minho added. While Earth was focused on diplomacy and trade, the colonies were preparing for war. The implications were sobering. The lost colonies hadn't just survived in isolation, they had become a military power that rivaled the entire Galactic Council. And they had done it all while fighting a war that the rest of the galaxy didn't even know existed. There's something else, Jian said, pulling up personal records from the colonial database. Their military personnel aren't like our soldiers. They're born into warfare, raised on stories of battles against impossible odds, trained from childhood, to see every day as potentially their last. She activated a video file that showed a training exercise on one of the colonial worlds. The participants looked like teenagers, but they moved with the precision and coordination of veteran special forces units. They were practicing an assault on a fortified position, using tactics that were both brutal and efficient. This is a standard graduation exercise for 17-year-olds, Jian explained. They're expected to demonstrate proficiency with at least 6 different weapon systems, tactical coordination in zero-gravity environments, and the ability to operate independently behind enemy lines for up to 30 days. They're not soldiers, Dr. Kim said quietly. They're weapons. Human weapons created by 2 centuries of constant warfare. The observation was accurate, but it missed something important. Minho had seen the way Commander Taehyun Ko and his people operated, and while they were certainly formidable fighters, they were still recognizably human. They cared about their families, their communities, and their future. War had shaped them, but it hadn't destroyed their humanity. They're survivors, he corrected. They became what they needed to become in order to protect the things they valued most. As the small fleet approached Earth's outer sensor networks, Minho found himself dreading the conversations that lay ahead. How could he explain to Earth's leaders what the colonies had become? How could he make them understand the scope of the threat that was approaching? The answer came sooner than expected. Admiral Kyung Lee was waiting for them when they docked at Luna Station, Earth's primary military facility. His expression was grim, and Minho could tell that something had happened while they were away. "Captain," the Admiral said as they met in the station's briefing room, "I hope you brought back more than just stories, because we're going to need every piece of information you collected." "Why, sir? What's happened?" Admiral Lee activated the room's main display, showing a star chart that made Minho's blood run cold. 3 star systems that had been marked as inhabited were now shown with red X's over them. The outer Vega colonies went silent 4 days ago, the Admiral explained. All 3 worlds, 12 billion people, no distress calls, no survivors. When our scout ships finally reached the system, they found nothing but empty space where the stars used to be. The room fell silent as everyone tried to process what they were hearing. Entire star systems didn't just disappear, especially not inhabited ones with advanced civilizations. The Galactic Council is calling it a natural phenomenon, Admiral Lee continued. They think it might have been caused by some kind of stellar collapse or cosmic event that we don't understand yet. But you don't believe that, Dr. Kim said. No, I don't, the Admiral replied. And neither will you, once you hear the rest of it. He played an audio recording that had been transmitted by one of the scout ships. The signal was weak and full of static, but the words were clear enough to understand. This is Scout Ship Hermes, investigating the Vega Tertius system. We're detecting massive structural damage to the planetary surfaces, but no signs of natural disaster. The cities A. The Galactic Council's response to Earth's warning followed a pattern that had become depressingly familiar over the centuries. Committees were formed with impressive names like the Emergency Threat Assessment Board and the Interspecies Security Coordination Panel. Expert witnesses gave testimony about the alleged anomalous events in the outer Vega system. Bureaucrats wrote reports about the reports that other bureaucrats had written. Defense Coordinator Jay Minot watched the emergency session from Earth's observation gallery, feeling his patience disappear with each passing hour of debate. The council chamber was a massive circular room designed to showcase the unity of galactic civilization. Representatives from dozens of species sat in carefully arranged tiers, their various forms of alien biology creating a spectacular display of diversity. But for all their impressive appearance, they seemed incapable of making decisions when those decisions involved acknowledging uncomfortable truths. High Counselor Thex Mai, a 7-foot-tall reptilian whose species had dominated galactic politics for millennia, stood at the central podium addressing the assembly. His voice carried the authority of someone who had never been personally threatened by anything more dangerous than a budget deficit. The human representatives continued to present evidence of this alleged devourer threat, he said, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. But we must ask ourselves whether these claims are based on verifiable facts or on the natural tendency of younger species to see conspiracies where none exist. Several council members nodded in agreement, their various forms of anatomy expressing approval in ways that Earth's diplomats had learned to recognize over the decades. The destruction of the outer Vega system is indeed tragic, Thexmai continued, but stellar phenomena are often unpredictable. Our scientists suggest that what the humans interpreted as an attack may have been caused by the natural collapse of an unstable neutron star. Ambassador Sungjin Lee, Earth's senior representative to the Council, stood to respond. He was a patient man who had spent his entire career learning to work within the Council's complex political structure. But even his diplomatic training was being tested by the current crisis. Honored Counselor, he said, his voice carefully controlled, our evidence indicates that the Vega system was systematically attacked by artificial constructs of unknown origin. The gravitational signatures detected by our scout ships are inconsistent with any known natural phenomenon. So, you claim, replied Counselor Vexithera, a crystalline being whose species prided themselves on logical analysis. But your evidence consists primarily of radio transmissions from worlds that have been isolated for 2 centuries, plus sensor readings that could have multiple interpretations. The dismissive tone was all too familiar. The Council had been treating human concerns this way since Earth joined the galactic community. Humanity was seen as young, emotional, and prone to dramatic overreactions to minor problems. What would convince you that this threat is real? Ambassador Lee asked. Concrete evidence, Thexmai replied. Physical samples of this alleged alien technology. Independent verification by Council scientific teams. Something more substantial than stories from self-proclaimed military commanders on forgotten worlds. The debate continued for hours, following the same circular patterns that had characterized council decision-making for centuries. By the time the session ended, the only concrete action approved was the formation of yet another investigative committee, this one tasked with evaluating the credibility of human claims regarding anomalous activity in the Outer Rim territories. Jamin left the council chamber feeling sick to his stomach. 12 billion people had died in the Vega system, and the galaxy's governing body was treating it like a minor administrative issue. His frustration turned to alarm when he received an encrypted message on his secure communicator. Admiral Kyung Lee's voice was tense, speaking in the kind of rapid, clipped sentences that military officers used when time was running out. Jamin, get back to Luna Station immediately. We have a situation developing in the Proxima sector. The flight back to Earth's lunar military facility took 3 hours, but it felt like an eternity. When Jamin finally reached the command center, he found Admiral Lee standing in front of a massive display screen showing real-time sensor data from across human space. What's happening? Jamin asked. 3 more systems have gone dark, Admiral Lee replied without turning around. Ross 128, Wolf 359, and Proxima Centauri B. All of them lost contact within the past 6 hours. The implications hit Jamin like a physical blow. Proxima Centauri B was one of the original colony worlds, one of the 15 that Commander Tae-hyun Ko had said were still operational. If the Devourers had reached that far into human space, then the timeline for their advance was much faster than anyone had predicted. Do we have any ships in those systems? He asked. The TDF Gwangju was on patrol near Wolf 359, Admiral Lee replied. We lost contact with them 4 hours ago. Tactical Commander Yojin Cho looked up from her console with an expression of barely controlled panic. Sir, long-range sensors are detecting massive energy signatures moving through the Barnard star system. Whatever hit the other colonies is heading directly toward the core worlds. The command center became a hive of activity as officers tried to coordinate responses to multiple simultaneous crises. Communication specialists attempted to re-establish contact with the lost systems, while tactical analysts worked to predict the enemy's next moves, but it quickly became clear that conventional military responses would be inadequate. Earth's fleet was designed for exploration and peacekeeping, not for the kind of total warfare that the colonies had been preparing for over the past 2 centuries. Sir, said Fleet Commander Sung-Hoon Kim from his position at the Strategic Planning Station, I've been analyzing the attack patterns. The enemy is moving too fast for our ships to intercept, and their technology is unlike anything in our databases. What about the colonial fleet? Admiral Lee asked. Can we coordinate with them? We're trying to establish contact, but their communication protocols are heavily encrypted. It may take hours to break through their security systems. We don't have hours, Jamin pointed out. At their current rate of advance, they'll reach inhabited core worlds within days. The harsh reality of the situation was becoming clear to everyone in the command center. For 2 centuries, the galaxy had enjoyed a period of relative peace and stability under the Galactic Council's leadership. Military forces were organized for policing actions and border disputes, not for existential warfare against technologically superior enemies. Sir, interrupted Communications Officer Minji Ro, I'm receiving a priority transmission from the Colonial Defense Network. They're requesting immediate coordination with Earth's military command. Admiral Lee activated the main communication system, and Commander Tae-hyun Ko's voice filled the command center. He sounded tired but determined, like a man who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. Admiral Lee, this is Colonial Command. We've detected multiple Devourer fleets moving through your space. The attacks on Vega and Proxima were preliminary strikes designed to test your defensive capabilities. How many ships are we talking about? Admiral Lee asked. Our long-range sensors count over 3,000 individual vessels in the primary attack formation, Tae-hyun replied. Each one is approximately the size of your largest battleships, but with weapons and defensive systems that are centuries ahead of your current technology. The numbers were staggering. Earth's entire fleet consisted of fewer than 300 ships, and most of those were not designed for serious combat operations. What are your recommendations? Admiral Lee asked. Immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel from core worlds within 50 light-years of the enemy's approach vector, Taehyun replied without hesitation. Full military mobilization of remaining populations with emphasis on guerrilla warfare and resistance operations. You're talking about abandoning entire star systems. I'm talking about survival, Admiral. The Devourers don't take prisoners, and they don't negotiate. They convert, consume, and move on. The only way to fight them is to deny them the resources they need for expansion. Jamin found himself thinking about the young pilot he had met on Kepler 442b, the teenager who had grown up expecting to fight battles that most people couldn't imagine. Now, children across the galaxy would be facing that same reality. Can your fleet provide support? Admiral Lee asked. We're already moving, Taehyun replied. But our ships are designed for defensive operations, not fleet engagements. We can harass their supply lines and conduct hit-and-run attacks, but we can't stop them in direct confrontation. Then what can we do? There was a long pause before Taehyun answered, You can give us time, Admiral. Every day you delay their advance is another day for our scientists to work on Project Daybreak. The super weapon program you mentioned? It's not a weapon in any conventional sense, Taehyun corrected. It's something that we hope will make this entire war irrelevant. But it's not ready yet, and it may never be ready if we can't protect the research facilities. The conversation was interrupted by alarms throughout the command center. Wing Commander Minji Ro's voice came over the intercom, tight with stress. Admiral, we're receiving. The news of humanity's victory at the Devourer Command Nexus spread through the galaxy like wildfire, but it wasn't celebrated as a triumph. It was received as a warning, a glimpse of something that most civilized beings had never imagined possible. General, Selman Park stood in the ruins of what had once been the Colonial Research Station on Wolf 35P9C, surveying the wreckage of humanity's most desperate gambit. The battle had lasted 18 hours and cost them everything, ships, stations, and too many lives to count. But when the smoke cleared, the impossible had happened. The Devourer advance fleet lay in pieces, their command structure shattered. Casualty. Reports are still coming in, reported Marine Colonel Woo Sung-jo, his armor scarred from leading boarding parties through the intestines of enemy ships. We lost 60% of the colonial fleet and 40% of Earth's forces, but the Devourer advance is completely stopped. The victory had come at a price that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Entire families of colonial warriors had been wiped out in single battles. Ships that had defended the outer rim for generations were nothing but debris now. But the enemy had been hurt worse. What about their main force? Soman asked. Long-range sensors show massive reorganization in the deep space formations, replied Tactical Commander Yojin Cho from her mobile command post. They're pulling back, regrouping, analyzing what happened here. The pause in enemy operations was temporary. Everyone knew that. But it gave humanity time to prepare for what was coming next. Dr. Soyoung Kim worked frantically in the makeshift laboratory that had been assembled from the wreckage of the research station. Around her, scientists from both Earth and the colonies collaborated on analyzing captured Devourer technology, trying to understand how an enemy that had seemed invincible could be defeated. The key is their networking system, she explained to the assembled military leaders. Individual Devourer units are incredibly powerful, but they rely on constant communication with their command nodes for tactical coordination. When we destroyed their primary nexus, we didn't just eliminate their leadership, we broke their ability to function as a unified force. For how long? Asked Admiral Kyung Lee, his uniform showing the strain of coordinating the largest space battle in human history. Unknown, So Young admitted. They're already adapting, creating new command structures that are more distributed and harder to target. But we've learned something important. They're not invincible. They can be hurt, they can be confused, and they can be defeated. The lesson had come at enormous cost, but it changed everything about how humanity viewed the war. The Devourers were no longer an unstoppable force of nature. They were an enemy that could be fought and beaten. What about Project Daybreak? General Park asked. The question brought uncomfortable silence to the command post. Project Daybreak had been humanity's ultimate hope, a weapon system that the colonies had been developing for 50 years. But the research facilities had been primary targets during the Devourer assault, and most of the key installations had been destroyed. "We saved what we could," said Chief Scientist Hyunwoo Lee, who had overseen the evacuation of personnel and data from the doomed research stations. "But we lost decades of work and most of our prototype equipment." "Can the project be rebuilt?" Admiral Lee asked. "With time and resources, yes," Hyunwoo replied. "But we're talking about years, maybe decades of additional development, and we'd need facilities that are completely secure from enemy attack." The practical implications were sobering. Humanity had bought time with their victory, but not enough time to complete their ultimate weapon. They would have to find another way to end the war. "There is an alternative," said Marshal Da-Hyun Kim, commander of the